Hey, what's going on? This is Glenn Kowalski from PalmTreeResearch.com and Livepreneur.com. And I want to talk to you a little bit about offshore banking and specifically why I believe that everyone, and by everyone, that means you, especially business owners, should have an offshore bank account. There is so much noise today about the concept of offshore bank account. So many people think that they're illegal and that the only reason you would want to have one is in order to hide money from the tax man. And the truth is, nothing could be further from the truth. First of all, offshore banks aren't illegal. I've had people actually tell me that my bank accounts that I have in Panama are illegal because they're offshore bank accounts. Well, you see, I live in Panama. So for me, an offshore bank account is the bank accounts I hold in the US, which happens to be the world's largest tax shelter if you're not an American citizen, but that's the topic of another video. My accounts over in Belgium, those are offshore bank accounts for me. For you, an offshore bank account is just any bank account that doesn't exist where you currently live. That's all it is. That's all it means. And well, a lot of people have this image about offshore bank accounts being, you're taking this briefcase of money and you're walking into this darkened alley, and you hand this guy in this dark car with tinted windows this briefcase of money, who gives you a piece of paper with a number on it, return, and then takes your briefcase to fly off to some Caribbean nation somewhere to deposit the money where nobody knows about it, so you're hiding from taxes. And the offshore world isn't like that anymore. Banks in other countries that you would use for offshore banking purposes that I'm going to talk about today, they're just as sophisticated as anything that you have in the US. I mean, you still get online banking, you still get debit cards, you still get credit cards, you get all the advantages of a US bank or a Canadian bank or wherever you happen to be. And you can't use them to hide money from the US anymore. Those days are done. That world is dead. If you're doing it, if that's your reason for having an offshore account, you are going to get caught, you are going to be arrested, you are going to be thrown in a cage. But all that being said, I still believe that an offshore bank account is something that's vital today, probably more vital than it's ever been. And are there tax saving advantages? Yes, absolutely. But those aren't the biggest advantages or the biggest reasons that you need to have a bank account. And though that gets into a whole other complex topic that's not the topic of today. What I want to talk about is the reason that everybody needs to have a bank account. So one of the first reasons that everybody needs to do it is just to kind of dilute your risk, and especially your political risk. Banks today are, a lot of them are struggling. The U.S. with the Corona thing is printing trillions of dollars of money. So the banks are at risk there. I'm going to talk a little bit later about banks being over leveraged. But one thing that's happening more and more often is that bank bail-ins are happening. So when banks are making these bad loans to people, they're taking these big risks that put their banks at risk. The governments are bailing them out. And what's happening with bank bail-ins is people's accounts who are sitting in those banks are actually taking money out of those accounts and putting them in to the bank to actually bail the bank back in using the depositor's own money. This happened recently in Cyprus. You've seen it happen there. And you might be thinking that it doesn't exist in the US and Canada and places like that, but it does. It's been written into all of their banking charters. Canada's banking charter, the US banking charter, they all have clauses now that allow bank bail-ins, which means they allow the banks to dip into your account to cover their bad moves. This is becoming more mainstream knowledge now. Before, people never talk about it, but now you even got people like Judge Napolitano on Fox who says that anybody who has more than $100,000 in a bank account, they're becoming targets and they're at risk for losing those deposits because the banks are making bad choices with their money. And that brings in another reason that diversifying your accounts offshore becomes more and more critical. And that's because the US and Canadian banks are, quite frankly, they're going broke. Because of fractional reserve banking, every time somebody puts $10,000 in a bank account, they can go out there and they can loan out, $90,000 based on that $10,000 loan. Everything is over leveraged, which means that if something ever happens to the bank and people start trying to pull their money out, you get what's called a run on the banks, and you're not going to be able to get your money. Once again, this hasn't happened in the US recently, but it has happened in several other European countries. It's happened in certain banks down in South America as well. It's becoming a big risk. And a lot of people in Canada and the US especially, they think that they're protected because of FDIC insurance. But what most people don't understand about FDIC insurance is that it's only covers something like 2.5% of all deposits out there. So if there's ever a serious run on the bank, a serious situation where you actually need that FDIC insurance, it's not going to be available. In theory, most times when banks go bankrupt, another bank absorbs it, and there's very little. Most people don't even know that it happens, and FDIC isn't actually even used. So in a case where FDIC has to be used, which would be in a case like a more cataclysmic collapse or larger type of bankruptcy, the FDIC insurance isn't going to protect you. A lot of banks offshore in other countries don't have things like fractional reserve banking, and they aren't over leveraged to the teeth. So if they bring in $10,000 of your money, they're holding $10,000 of your money, and that money actually exists. They haven't loaned out $90,000 on it. So that means that those banks are actually safer for your funds because those banks aren't gambling. They're not making the bad bets. The US banks are making and Canadian banks are making all of the time. So it just becomes a safer place to be able to diversify and hold your money because, like I said, they're not loaning it out. They're keeping that money in. So if you give them $10,000, they have $10,000. They're well, secure, safe banks that aren't going to go bankrupt because they're not putting themselves in risk like the US banks are. And you have seen the banks in the US go bankrupt. You saw what happened with Lehman Brothers. You've seen what's happened in the US in the 2000 crisis. There's banks that are isolated from that who won't be affected in that type of situation. And the final reason that I want to talk about for why you should have an offshore bank account is because of asset protection. North America has become so litigious. I mean, you can be sued over, somebody slipping on the ice in front of your house or your business. Somebody drinking hot coffee is causing millions of dollars of lawsuits. There's so many things in the US and Canada and parts of Europe that you can be sued for, and anywhere. I mean, anywhere you are, you can be sued. But by opening an offshore account and by having assets in those accounts, those funds are protected no matter what you get sued for. It is very difficult for anybody, any lawyer, any ex-spouse, any ex-employee that's bitter, anybody to get their hands on those funds is very difficult. I'm going to talk more about some of those asset protection aspects in another video, but in order to go after your offshore accounts, first of all, the lawyer in the US or Canada, wherever you are, they have to know that that account even exists. So that on its own is very difficult for them to know. But even if they do figure that out for whatever reason, in order to sue you, it gets very difficult in these other places to sue. It's not like Canada or the US where anybody can sue anybody. You have to, in Panama, for example, if you want to sue somebody, you have to put up 2.5 times the amount of the amount you're entitled to win. So let's say you're suing for $1 million. You got to put up $2.5 million to actually just initiate that lawsuit. Then that $2.5 million is held up in the court system while you actually go through and try to defend your case in a foreign country where you have to get foreign lawyers involved. You have to deal with a court system that you're not aware of. You're dealing with an entire system that you're not aware of, or the person who's suing you is dealing with an entire system that they're not aware of. Sometimes for years, 2, 3, 5, 10 years for these lawsuits while all this is tied up. It makes it so prohibitive that most people won't even try to touch that money. So you become very protective. protected of what's going on, and for nobody can get their hands on it. It's just a way. It's a type of insurance for you in case something ever goes wrong. Like I said earlier, there are also tax advantages to an offshore account, but that does depend based on where you're living, what your citizenship is. There's a whole bunch of factors in there, but it's not the biggest reason that you want to have an offshore bank account. But it is three. But these were three that are. We've created a free resource that it's going to give you a lot more details, and it's going to explain, what's legal and what's not, and it's going to kind of give you a complete roadmap into using what we call international identity tactics to internationalize your life, with an offshore bank accounts being just one aspect of that. And what they do is, working together, these identity tactics, they help you create complete personal, financial, and location independence, and really to live an unconventional life, which is different from what we've been taught and what everybody else is living. There's going to be a link either below or above this video, depending on where you're watching it. Go download it now. It's completely free, and I'm going to see you in the next video.